The card I'm holding in my hands is a cut-down RX560 from a Median computer. It has just 2 GB of VRAM and 14 compute units, compared to 4 GB and 16 compute units on the commercially sold variant. Is this just another piece of e-waste, or will it actually game? Let's find out after the intro. Before getting into the RX560 itself, let's build ourselves a proper game PC. The AMD A8 unit is getting too much of a bottleneck. I had this C170 board with an i5-6500 CPU laying around for quite a while already, so it's about time we start using it. Here's 16 GB of DDR4 for it. Yeah, I like flexing with expensive stuff. We're going to put it in this Cooler Master case that has a see-through side panel. Very gamey, very gamey. Oh, here's the front, if anyone cares. The Corsair GS500 power supply will do just fine in here. Let's put in the I/O shield first. Add standoffs for the motherboard. And in goes the motherboard itself. I bought this cheap Mars gaming cooler from Amazon with RGB because game PC. The cooler allows to be connected at an angle, which is nice, because there's heat sinks in the way here. Right, let's add our memory. Connecting the necessary cables. It lives! Alright, let's add the main subject of this video. This card has no need for PCI Express connectors, so you can basically throw it in any other PC. Add an SSD. Let's connect the case fans as well, just because it looks cool. Oh! Cable management is for pussies! I first installed Windows and the latest driver from AMD, which is fairly recent for this card. In Linux we're using the AMD GPU driver, which identifies this card as an RX460. Specs-wise, this card seems closer to an RX460 than a full-fledged 560, so I guess it makes sense. Anyway, let's see what it does in both Windows and Linux. Starting off with Black Mesa at 1080p medium. I'm getting over 100 FPS average, with 1% lows down to 70 on Windows. On Linux I'm getting similar frame rates, but 1% lows seem a tad higher. Ah, nice to start with a win for Lin. Batman Arkham Knight is quite a bit more demanding, and at 1080p low settings, the built-in benchmark gives me an average of 55 FPS with a minimum of 44 on Windows. I'd say these are playable frame rates for a game like this. On Linux, the average and minimum frame rates are quite a bit lower sadly, about 3/4 of what we got on Windows. WRC7 1080p medium settings gives me some 50 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to the low 40s. Pulling the settings down to low is a good idea, as this bumps the frame rates to over 60 FPS average, with 1% lows down to 49 FPS, all while looking about the same. On Linux I'm getting some 5 to 10 FPS less at both settings. Turbo Overkill 1080p and the graphics profile set to quality gives me some 50 to 60 FPS average with 1% lows down to the high 30s on Windows. On Linux things are a lot worse in this game, cutting the frame rates in half. Damn, things started off so good for Linux. In A Plague Tale Innocence at 1080p and low settings, I got some mid-30s frame rates with 1% lows just a few frames behind on Windows. Actually reasonably playable at this frame rate and still looks great with low settings. This is again quite a bit lower on Linux sadly, with a low 30s frame rate average, but 1% lows are about half of what we've seen before. Grip at 1080p medium settings provides me a 50ish average frame rate, with 1% lows down to the mid-30s. I didn't really feel these lows all that much though, it played fine like this. On Linux, This is a tad lower again, in the mid-40s average and lows to some mid-20s. Counter-Strike 2 on Windows at 1080p medium settings gave me some 95 FPS average with 1% lows down to the mid-50s. On Linux this needed some tinkering. The native port did pretty horrible with some mid-20s FPS. I switched to the Windows version with Proton, but that's even worse. The Windows version with a -Vulkan startup parameter already did quite a bit better, giving me some mid-60s average, but 1% low still hardly in the double digits. I tried the native port again, also with a -Vulkan startup parameter, which I figured would be dumb, as the game uses Vulkan anyway. Guess what? Now we're getting a mid-70s frame rate with 1% lows in the mid-20s. Still quite a bit less than we got in Windows, especially in the 1% lows, but I'm amazed that it makes this much of a difference. So switching from Vulkan to Vulkan gives you 3 times the original speed. Cool! Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 720p and the medium preset shows an average of 46 FPS in the built-in benchmark. Afterburner showing me some 33 FPS for 1% lows on Windows. On Linux the benchmark shows an average of 39 FPS and Mango Hut is showing me some 20 FPS for the 1% lows. Switching to DirectX 12 mode to utilize VKD3D makes things a lot worse. Super Tux card. Yes, there's a Windows build of it. At 1080p and a graphical effects level at 5, show the typical FPS of 65, with a steady FPS being 53. Numbers that are pretty close to the average and 1% lows shown by Afterburner. This should do better on Linux, right? Oh, not really. Well, especially the lows are a lot worse on Linux. Damn. A friend of mine wants to play Neo 3. Would that be possible with this card? On Windows, the game keeps bugging me about VRAM, so I guess it's not a very great idea. At 720p and the settings very, very low, it's as unplayable as it gets. On Linux, the game won't even launch because of VRAM. Probably for the best. Let's try War Thunder. We're running it at 1080p medium settings. This free-to-play game seems to be online only and I have no idea what I'm doing, so sorry for messing up your game if this was you. Anyway, some mid-70s FPS with 1% lows down to the mid-50s. Seems fine. On Linux, the average frame rate was just a few frames less, but the 1% lows are quite a bit lower with some low 30s FPS. Darkenstein 3D, a completely free FPS at 1080p medium settings, ran at some low 80s FPS average, which could be great if the 1% lows weren't around 20 FPS, and I could really feel those. The frame rates on Linux were about half of that, so... By the way, capping the frame rate to 30 only made things worse. I guess this card is pretty decent, as long as you don't want to play modern AAA games. Especially the 2GB of VRAM just isn't great for modern titles. I did expect this one to do better on Linux, but apart from Black Mesa, just about everything runs better on Windows. Some do okay on Linux, some just bad. I guess this is because the 2GB of VRAM, which DXVK and VKD3D use to translate DirectX calls to Vulkan. On the other hand, the 2GB of VRAM weren't always fully utilized, so I don't know. That's about it for today. I hope you liked this video. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.